Bienvenidos, fans of the hottest entertainment on the planet. Jaimé En Fuego here, and my coverage from Fantasia International Film Festival continues. This is technically day 8 for me, so this is actually for a film that just had its world premiere today, and it is entitled Home Bodies. Now, yeah, you have to kind of make sure as you're sifting through the IMDb's and letterboxes and, whatever other places where you can get some information about this film. There's a lot of films with this title. This has the spacing between the two words, home bodies, but you also have homebody. Homebody's all is one word. So yeah, search for the one from 2026, directed by, I want to say Casey Walker. I just want to double check. Yes. And so Casey actually had a film, I think over a decade ago, a little bit zombie, I think is what it was called. But yeah, so went on to producing and stuff. A lot of different Canadian features up there, and world premiere, as I said. And so this is kind of a one location dystopian kind of thing, but there's only like hints given at it because of the fact that so we have the film starts essentially where we have two different children, just like infants, newborns, more or less. So you have one clad in red, one clad in blue. You can obviously see the gender disambiguation there and everything. But yeah, and then we flash to them as I guess like not quite young adults. They're more like, I'd say maybe like 5th, 6th grade-ish, maybe somewhere in there, so I'd say like 12, maybe 13, like right on the cusp of being teenagers and such. And so Red is actually significantly just, I guess, more masculine in some of her like just assertiveness and just like tendencies and personality traits and stuff like that, whereas Blue is a little bit more effeminate. And this is made very clear at one particular point early on where they want to play catchball, and yet there is just more force to Red's throws and everything. But they're in this like very retro kind of home. It looks like something out of the mid to late 20th century, I'd say. I mean, because they do have a VHS recorder there, so I'd say something out of the 80s-ish maybe. And they report to some sort of like big brother, all-knowing, all-seeing sort of like just vocal presence called Papa. So I mean, just calling their overlord of sorts Papa. I mean, I immediately think Stranger Things, especially with the just decor and the type of home that they're in. And so yeah, man. So they are obviously living in some sort of sheltered place where they're being studied to some degree, but it's not really made particularly clear like what the purpose of them being there is, at least early on. And once again, I don't do spoiler reviews for these sort of things, but yeah, it's not made abundantly clear, at least early on, why exactly they're there. Now we get like maybe a few hints and whatnot later on, but stuff is kept relatively vague for a very good portion of this film. And so, after, I believe it's like their 42nd Noel, as they refer to it, to Papa, when they're having some conversation, and, they have like a Christmas tree, and there's like, gifts and everything like that. They get a androgynous, like, android kind of thing, I guess, completely bald, and, maybe slightly effeminate in features, but also with like kind of a masculine build a little bit. So, just very vague and asexual in that degree. And so it's their new pal. And so they just start calling this presence pal, presumably cybernetic kind of thing that's there. And yet it seems to have like human tissue, so like maybe it's more along the lines of like a Terminator kind of thing. Not to say that this film has comparisons to that or anything, but in that particular build, it was like, okay, there was like internal circuitry and everything, but yet there was actual like real like humanoid like flesh on the outside and stuff. And so but Pal does not talk. And Pal pretty quickly, Red, the girl, takes like a liking and an affinity to Pal, and it causes some just kind of tension and jealousy with Blue. And Blue starts really acting up. The boy starts acting just a little more erratic and stranger and things of that nature. But, the one thing that is made very clear early on is for whatever purposes of study that these two have been growing in this isolated, just sort of... you can't really compare. I know in the synopsis they compare it to Cube, which is another very celebrated Canadian genre film, but it's not really, even though they listed as horror, I didn't particularly find this to be horror. This was much more like, sci-fi drama thriller than actual like full-blown horror. I mean, there is some unnerving stuff in it. They have every convenience taken care of. They have like a self-replenishing refrigerator. At one point very early in the movie, they take a few things out, and then immediately as the camera pans back to it, as they, look in, once again, it's like completely full of things. And so, and then they have some sort of, I'm presuming the intention behind it is to kind of, I don't know, teach them some sort of social skills or, what have you. But they're watching this very strange VHS, and that's another thing where you can tell it's dystopian and maybe some sort of weird future, but yet this particular experiment with these two kids is recreating, that late 20th century sort of thing. And so the VHS tapes they're watching is like a weird grainy show with like people in like animal outfits and puppetry and things of that nature. And so, it was kind of giving me Channel Zero Candle Cove vibes. So it's like Candle Cove kind of creepy in that sort of regard. And so Blue is just very enamored with the show. Red, not so much. It seems like they just don't, they just kind of coexist as opposed to connect, is kind of the vibe that you get from both of their performances. And both of the kids are quite good, I gotta say, especially as their arcs progress and they start to have like this wedge between them in this pal character who, once again, doesn't really talk or interact, more so just seemingly there to observe, and perhaps just it's like adding, a different variable to the experiment, I guess, of the observation of the two of their behaviors and how they're growing and, nuances of their maturation, perhaps, or something of that nature. So, but there is just an inherent, just like oddness and eeriness to it, which is probably why they tried to file it into the horror sector of things on Fantasia. By the time we get to the third act, that's where things really ramp up significantly more, and we do have some of the tension that has built from just the friction amongst at least our two lead characters, Red and Blue and everything. And I do enjoy the set design, especially where we see it in the poster that I showed you guys at the beginning of the video, where when they do go to have like their palaver of sorts with Papa, they're almost looking up at this like just white circular kind of, it does feel almost like godlike in the way, it just kind of beams light down upon them and everything, and just this booming, just huge, loud, powerful voice and all of that. So there is like a sort of like reverence and worship, to this voice that the two of them interact with and everything. But you can tell that Red is definitely going through a much more kind of questioning state in her maturation in comparison with Blue. And so once again, there's not much else that I can say beyond the fact that I did enjoy a lot of the set design, as I had mentioned, even though a good portion of it is just things like, the recreation of this sort of house. But there's also like, Blue has a affinity for drawing things, and the things that he draws, which are usually animals from this like barn TV show that they watch, there are some videos that Red discovers the pal character watching that really add a just very fearful and almost like scary sort of element to the things that Blue is prone to watch. And so when he does see the different VHS that, Red and Pal at one point are watching together, it kind of freaks him out based on, the fact that he loves the barn show so much and because it's other stuff with animals without getting into too many specifics and everything. And so I definitely can feel the vibe that, Casey wanted with the script, and he didn't write the script. There's two other writers behind it, but at least the way that he worked with his cinematographer and with the editing process and everything, and with, the set and, the costume design and everything, he did want everything to be very symbolic. And the fact that, like Blue is typically associated with, masculinity and with boys and everything, but They didn't go pink with the girl character. They went red, and red, like a crimson kind of red. Obviously, we think of blood. We think of rage, turning red and all these different things and stuff like that. So there's a lot of symbolism in the way that, it is this very blissful baby blue almost that, the boy character is clad in, and it's like a deeper red that the girl character is clad in. So it is kind of flipping the gender norms on their head a little bit. But, unfortunately, without getting into full-on spoilers for the finale of this movie, it did kind of veer into some predictability that I, kind of saw coming, and yet, that's not to, be totally detrimental about it, because it did feel like kind of the natural progression that comes with the questioning and with getting into more of a realization about the nature of their situation and everything like that. So this one, I will admit, in the end, I wasn't completely over the moon for it. But, that's the thing. One location and, trying to do a lot with, concept and themes, as opposed to having any sort of bigger budget where it's really tough, in my estimation, to do low budget science fiction sort of stuff as opposed to low budget horror a lot of the time. And that's been just kind of the case at a lot of festivals I've covered, whether it's, IHSFF, as part of Phoenix Film Festival, stuff I've seen over the years at like Chattanooga or Fantastic, different festivals I've covered in my tenure of film journalism and everything. And so this one had great performance from the two kids. I enjoyed when we kind of pulled the curtain back a little bit as to the nature of where they dwell and see a little bit more about some of the strings being pulled. And I mean, you see it in the trailer, so I guess it's not that bad for me to mention that there is like there is this like garbage cellar of sorts. Like, it almost feels like the experiment is getting to either a conclusion, or that maybe those who are looking down at them, Papa and everyone associated with that just booming presence, maybe some things are breaking down. I mean, I'm not sure. And so for that reason, that was where things were relatively strong, at least in my estimation. But I feel like I've kind of seen some of these things before. We've seen like the smart houses done to death at this point in the horror genre the last few years, and like, I think around the pandemic and then all of the, years that have come after, because of the fact that we were all on lockdown and spent so much time at home, there's been this fascination with like the whole just, bunker sort of film. And I love bunker films, I genuinely do. I mean, 10 Cloverfield Lane, I could mention various others. That's just the first that comes to mind. But it really does boil down to the tension amongst the characters, which is good in this. And the dynamic of the variable of Pal being thrown in there is good. But it just didn't really, in the end, deliver a lot of surprise or enough to really set itself apart from similar things. I mean, you've got some Ex Machina in there a little bit as well, very slight degree. So if I'm going to compare it to films that I thought, did some of this stuff a lot better, that's where I guess it just didn't quite hit the mark for me as much as I would have liked. So that is my thoughts on Home Bodies, everybody. So that is going to do it for my Day 8 review. There's still 10 more days of reviews coming, everybody. There are going to be a few coming to the Horror Show channel at some point. The ones that are like full-on horror, we're talking like Bowels of Hell and, I Love Paris, things that are just really full-blown horror. And I mean, I Love Paris is about vampires and whatever, but that's neither here nor there. But yes, the festival runs now through August 2nd, Sunday, August 2nd. So there's still, if you are up in the Great White North of Montreal, Quebec, Canada, checking out the festival, soy envioso. Wish I could be up there. I am just doing virtual press once again here in the deadly desert of Arizona. But that's going to do it for me, everybody. I extend the grande gracias. I have been Jaimé En Fuego. You can find me on all social media sectors, primarily Twitter, X, Instagram, Facebook, for those who even still use the fake book, the Face Beezy and everything. A little bit on the Tiki-Talkies. It is primarily just short form stuff like reels, for things that are in theaters. So I am in the coming days going to be checking out a few things. Motor City with the Reacher dude, and then the Reacher around dude. What else? I just checked out the Pinocchio Unstrung. That was something else. That'll be showing up on my companion channel that I am a part of, the Horror Show. And obviously the new Nicholas Winding Refn, I believe is the name of the director. He had a film that just played here at Fantasia, kicked the festival off, called Her Private Hell. So I'm going to check that in theaters as well. And so look for short form reviews on my TikTok of that. And that's going to do it, everybody. So until the review mañana, next up, and until that reel of Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, sin amigos, constant viewers, say thank you. I hope we have been well met. Share more of this film palaver sooner rather than later. And until that next Fantasia review, adios.